Okay, we're going to replace the secondary encoder hub on the elbow joint. So first, you can just get the arm into a more comfortable position. So somewhere out here, it's just easier to access all the screws. And the first objective is we're going to have to take off a few guards. So we're going to take off this guard, we're going to take off this guard, and we're going to take off this guard, which has some access points, which we'll show you in the next video. Okay, so we got all the screws out of this panel, and don't forget that there is a screw down here that's sometimes hard to see. So when all the screws are removed, this panel can come off. You can set it aside. The next panel that we're going to want to take off is this panel here. So there's a bunch of screws there, and there's some screws here that use a different Allen key, smaller Allen key along the side. Once this panel is off, there's a hidden screw up in here that's going to allow us to get the front panel off. I'll show you in the next video. Okay, so to remove that back panel, start by removing these two screws here, just because the remaining screws in the back will then keep the panel in place. So then you can come around to the back and you can remove the rest of the screws, so then this panel will come off. So next, you'll see this is the screw here that's difficult to access. That's going to allow us to get the next panel off. What I tend to do is I tend to cut this zip tie. You can re-put it on later, just to get the wires out of the way so that you have better access to this screw. So we're going to take off this front panel by starting with this screw, and then we're going to proceed to the front and remove the panel, and we'll show you that in the next video. Okay, so now all the screws are out for this front panel here. Just note that there is one screw kind of hidden right under here. You know, you would notice if it wasn't out. So this will pull off. And then the next panel that we're going to remove is going to be this top panel here. So that'll be in the next video. Okay, so this panel is ready to come off. So I did loosen at the back here. You don't have to take these two screws out, but if you loosen them a little bit, it just allows this to slide up a little more freely on the way out. So that comes out and out. This only has one screw on it, this little panel here. So it's just easy just to take it off, just to get it out of the way. So I'll do that in the next clip here. And then we're going to clip this wire clip here, and then we'll be ready for the next video clip. Okay, so as you can see, there was just one screw holding this panel on, so we're just taking it off. Get it out of the way. That gives us access to the wires for the lasers. So there's one more zip tie here. We're just going to clip that. So that frees up. The wires are nice and loose now. So if you come around to the front, you can see I already took out the other three screws, but you're going to take these screws out now. Now these screws are a little bit longer than the panel screws, so you're going to want to save one so we can hook this assembly up out of the way where there's going to be no strain on the wires. Keep in mind when you reinstall this piece, it sits flat on this top bar, and if you reinstall it, make sure it's flat and line all the holes up. Then be sure to check your laser alignment at that point, because you have access to everything here, so you can make sure A, that the lasers are still working, and B, it's a lot easier to align them right now than repaneling everything and discovering that they need adjusting. So remember that when you're installing, to check the laser alignment when you reinstall this piece. So I'm going to take off this piece, so this is now floating. And this allows us to kind of, and using this screw, because that was the longer screw, remember? We can just hook it up to one of these holes. You can just find a hole, doesn't matter which hole, there's 4 to choose from, somewhere where there's no pressure on the wires, and you can just tighten this out of the way like that, and that way it's not hanging in the air and there's no pressure on these wires. Okay, so next we're going to proceed to taking off this block here. Okay, so now coming down using your 3/16 Allen key, there's 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. I've taken 3 out. This is just the last one coming out now. And again, the 3/16 T-handle Allen key, they're a little bit longer. So take all 4 bolts out. And then you'll be ready to hopefully wiggle this entire top block off, using the handle as a nice sort of wiggle point, and you can kind of wiggle and lift at the same time. And this should come off. Now just be careful when it comes off. You don't want any parts to fall. And this one came off really easy. Everything came out nicely, and we're ready to start taking apart some of the links. Okay, now that we got the top block removed, we're going to start removing some of these links so that we have access to the hub, which is mounted on the bottom of this pulley. So I like to start by taking this screw out here. Now make sure when you take the link screws out that your Allen key gets nice and tight down to the bottom. It's easy to strip these otherwise. So I've already pre-loosened these, so they're going to come out fairly easy for me here. So this one here, when you get it out, this should lift up. What you want to be careful is there's a washer under here that may come up with it. And as you can see, it did. It's stuck right there. So for now, I'm just going to drop it back on the shaft so I don't lose it. Okay, and then I can just set this link aside. I don't want to lose the screw. This pin, there's enough leverage on this pin, it shouldn't fall out. It can fall out, but it's generally pretty tight. I just stick that screw in there like that so I don't lose it. We're going to take this one apart now. We want to be careful. This link's pretty heavy. There's a big weight in here. So we're going to start by taking off this one first. And then what I do here is I push the pin using the Allen key, is push the pin down like that. And I take it out and I just stick it back in here. And I put the screw back in loosely so that I don't lose the pin. And we're going to proceed by doing the exact same thing up here. This is already loose. Now remember, this link is heavy. So when you get it out, and you're going to push this pin out, and you'll see that this is pretty heavy. And then you can just put the pin back into the hole, and again, put the screw in so you don't lose it. Okay, so now we're going to take off the top pulley, but in order to do that, we got to loosen the belt. It's snug right up. There's two screws here that need to get loose in order to loosen the belt, and they can be difficult to access depending on where the Allen key, fits in there. It's sometimes hard to turn the Allen key. One way I find is to get back in here. I can get in here and I can get a little leverage, and I got that one loose. The other thing you can do is if you have a bar, we call it a cheater bar with a hole in it, is you can get the Allen key in, especially if it's a ball nose Allen key, and then you can use the cheater bar on the top, and you can loosen the screw that way as well, just to help get that loose. So when those screws are loose, they don't need to come out. This will rotate. There is a set screw. It's right there, and it accesses with a 3/32 hex key at the back. And when you loosen that set screw, you'll see that the belt is starting to come loose. So that set screw's out of the way. That'll now push back, and this belt is quite loose. It falls off basically. All right, and now that the belt is off, it just came up and over the pulley, this will just lift up and off. Do remember there's a hub there. The hub may be disattached or whatever, so there's glass, so be careful. And there's that spacer on the bottom. Okay, so you can put that back on. And there's also that top spacer here that we stuck in earlier. So you can just stick it on there if you want for now. Just don't forget, when you reinstall, it goes on top, not on the bottom. Also be cautious that this is floating in space over here. The linkage is floating. It's fine, but just be cautious, don't knock it or anything. But having this off will allow you to then get the secondary encoder hub off and mount it back on, and then you'll reverse everything for your reassembly. We do have belt tensioning instructions and secondary alignment instructions as well, and you can go through those separately in the PDF format and just make sure that your encoder's aligned and that your belt is retensioned properly before you go through and reassemble everything. Okay, we just wanted to do a quick reinstall video with a couple of tips of the secondary alignment encoder here and this washer. So once you get the new hub mounted, and when you mount it, you try and make sure everything's nice and flat on the hub. And because this didn't move, in theory, everything should come back perfect for you. So as long as you're careful, don't touch the reader here. And these are the two screws if you do have to make any adjustments. Typically you can just loosen one screw and move this up or down, but let's hope that you're not going to have to do anything. So take off this washer again, and now you're going to carefully, you don't want to hit the glass, put this back on. You can look through the top and you can sort of see sometimes it's a bit of a wiggle. So that's down now, and make sure that's nice and flat, and then put that washer back on top so that the smaller diameter is up like that. Okay, before completing putting all the links back on, it's important that you get the belt on. So I tend to look at the numbers and I try and make sure that they're upright, not upside down. It's not crucial, but it seems nicer. So when I put the belt on, I go below the big pulley, put it on the little pulley, and inside the belt tensioner like that. And then I lift the belt on, and as you can see, sometimes it's a little tight, so you can just work it around with your fingers, and sometimes if you rotate it a little bit, it pops on like that. And then from here, you can tension your belt by following the belt tensioning instructions and making sure that it's at the right tension. Okay, so also on reassembly, when you put this big heavy link on, it's important that you put this pin in first. It's just too much weight to hang off that side. So you get everything ready, you can get your pin out. You can put the pin up and through like that. It should sit there on its own. And then you can slide this down on. So, and then put your screw on. So once you get this link back on like that, you can then proceed to do this and down here. And that way you don't have, 5 or 6 pounds hanging off this link up there. Okay, then on reinstalling this link here, just this pin, usually there's friction on it enough to just kind of slide it down out of the way. It'll sit there. And then you can put this on. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a wiggle. Push it down. And then you can come on over and you can line up this pin with the hole. Push it up through. And then reinstall your screws. Okay, so now you're ready to put this big block on. Sometimes when this comes off, there's 2 dowels here. It can come apart in various ways. Sometimes the dowels fall out of this block, sometimes not. If they did fall out of this block, you could pre-put the dowels in these holes. It doesn't really matter too much. As you can see here, this all sort of stayed together, so that's what we're going to do. So when you put this block on, there's a hole here that goes on the top of the shaft, and there's also the 2 dowels that have to line up in these holes, and that sort of keeps everything aligned. So it's just a matter of looking at all the 3 holes at once and trying to wiggle it back down into place like that. Sometimes this shaft is a little bit off and you gotta push and pull on it a little bit in order to get it down. So once it clips down, you're gonna put the 4 screws in from the bottom. And then what you should maybe quickly check, if you've already tensioned your belt, just give it a double check, especially if there was any influence on the shaft, because any influence on the shaft has the potential of messing with the belt tension a little bit. Or potentially you could even just wait and tension the belt to this step. It's just there's a little bit more to work around. But it's important that you recheck the belt tension after you install this top block. And once you put the 4 screws in, you want to come and you want to make sure that the calibration pin goes down in correctly and through this block. But again, check these things after you tighten up the 4 bolts. So this is just an addendum to the other video. You'll notice when we took this big block off, everything came off as one. On this one, you can see how 1 dowel came out, 1 didn't. Also, we forgot to mention in the other video is there was a washer on top of this piece here. And what happened in the other video when we took it off is it actually was stuck here, which was okay. It went back together fine. But just remember to keep track of this washer. So it's going to end up there, in addition to the washer that was under this link. And you can see it's stuck again as well. So remember, this washer goes with the flange side up, like that. This piece goes on like this. And then this washer goes on top there. And I said we almost forgot that washer, so be careful not to do that when you're doing this, because that washer ended up sticking to the top of this piece. Okay, so now we got this block back on. The 4 screws are tight. We've confirmed that the calibration pin does go down, and we also want to check to make sure there's no vertical play. So on the pulley, if you sort of just pull up and down a little bit, and that just makes sure that everything is seated correctly. If you notice that the pin's not going down, or if this is wiggling a little bit, just give us a shout and we'll have to go through and troubleshoot potentially some of the problems that might have occurred. Once you get this back on, you're ready to put the lasers back on. So remember, when you put the lasers back on, it's important then to check and proceed to calibrate your lasers, because it's just easier to readjust them if you need to at this point. So they'll just come up here like this, and they should be really close. Push it down on there, the 4 screws, and then check them. They should be good, or they might need a little bit of adjustment, but there shouldn't be anything major. Additionally, once you get this mounted back on and you've checked them, don't forget to go through, re-zip tie up your wire clips here. So you want to clip the wires back into here, so it was 2 places, and make sure that the wires are going to be out of the ways of the pulleys. From there, it should be pretty straightforward, repaneling in the opposite order that you took the panels off. I like to put the panels on a little bit loosely on each screw first, and then once you get the panel on and all the screws in, I go through and tighten up all the screws, and then I proceed to the next panel. So if you have any confusions about the panels, we're not going to go through each video clip for reinstalling the panels. You can just go through and watch the beginning clips, and you'll see how the panels came off.